Please don't eat that. My grandson's voice cut through the laughter at our family dinner. I frowned. Why, sweetheart? Just please don't, he whispered, eyes wide with fear. Something inside me froze. I quietly slid my plate toward my daughter-in-law's mother and took hers instead. 15 minutes later, she slumped forward in her chair, and that moment revealed everything. I'm Inns, and at 68, I thought I knew my family better than anyone. I thought the biggest betrayal I'd ever face would be someone forgetting my birthday or skipping Sunday dinner. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was a calm Tuesday evening in October when I decided to host what I thought would be a cozy family get-together. The crisp autumn air made me crave comfort food, so I spent the whole afternoon preparing my signature pot roast, a recipe I'd perfected over 40 years. The house smelled like warmth itself, garlic, rosemary, and the deep, rich aroma of slow-cooked beef. My son David arrived first with his wife of 3 years, Ara, and my 12-year-old grandson Marty. That boy is the light of my life, curious, kind, and always smiling. But that night, he wasn't smiling. He looked restless, nervous, watching his mother in a way that made my heart ache. Ara had been acting oddly lately. I'd noticed how she'd glance at me when she thought I wasn't looking, how she always brought up my health, my medication, my age. She was 34, beautiful, polished, her perfect hair and polite smile never slipping, but somehow never reaching her eyes. "You've outdone yourself again, Inns," she said, surveying the dining table I'd set with my best china. "It all looks wonderful." Her tone was too sweet, almost rehearsed. Still, I smiled back. "Thank you, dear. I know how much David loves pot roast." Even David seemed tense. The easy laughter I remembered from his boyhood was gone. He hugged me stiffly, avoiding my eyes. "Where's your mother, Ara?" I asked, noticing an empty seat. "Oh, she'll be here any minute," Ara replied quickly. When Margaret, Ara's mother, finally arrived, I greeted her warmly. She was a gentle woman in her 70s, her silver hair and kind smile reminding me of my own mother. As we all sat down, a strange unease settled over the table. Ara kept glancing toward the kitchen. Marty fidgeted. Margaret sat unusually still. Then Ara said brightly, "I made sure to serve you the plate with the extra vegetables, Inns. I know you love them." I looked down. Everything looked perfect tender meat, creamy potatoes, perfectly seasoned beans. But something about the way she said your plate made me uneasy. "That's very thoughtful, dear," I said slowly, picking up my fork. And that's when Marty shouted, "Grandma, don't eat that!" The room fell silent. My hand trembled mid-air. His little face was pale, eyes full of tears. "Please, Grandma, please just don't." Ara's voice cracked as she tried to cover. "Marty's been having some behavior problems lately. Maybe you should go to your room, honey." But I'd raised children. I knew fear when I saw it. And my grandson was terrified. Without really knowing why, I stood up and turned to Margaret. "Would you mind switching seats with me? I'd love to sit beside Marty." Ara opened her mouth to protest, but Margaret smiled kindly. "Of course, dear." We switched places. I sat next to Marty. Margaret sat where I had been. With that switch, our plates were exchanged. I now had Margaret serving, and she had the one Ara had so carefully set aside for me. "There," I said, forcing a light tone. "Now I can keep an eye on this little troublemaker." I ruffled Marty's hair, and he leaned into me, clinging like he finally felt safe. Dinner went on in uneasy quiet. The laughter was gone. Ara barely touched her food, David kept checking his watch, and Marty stayed close to my side. Only Margaret seemed truly relaxed, smiling and chatting about her garden as she enjoyed what should have been my dinner. 15 minutes later, her fork slipped from her hand. "Oh," she murmured weakly, pressing a hand to her head. "I feel dizzy." I turned just as her eyes rolled back and she slumped sideways in her chair. The next few moments blurred together, David shouting her name, my hands shaking as I called for help. But through it all, one thought echoed in my mind. That plate was meant for me. As the paramedics worked on Margaret, I caught Marty's eyes through the chaos. He was crying, deep, heartbroken sobs. But when our eyes met, what I saw wasn't only fear, it was relief. My 12-year-old grandson was relieved that I wasn't the one being taken away, which meant he knew. He knew exactly what had been in that food, and if he knew, someone had told him. Standing in my doorway, watching the flashing lights disappear down the street, I realized the truth I'd been too afraid to face. Someone I loved had just tried to erase me from their life. Margaret survived, but only barely. At St. Mary's Hospital, doctors told us she'd been exposed to a toxic chemical, something sweet-tasting, nearly odorless, and extremely harmful if swallowed. It had attacked her kidneys. I sat in that cold, sterile waiting room, surrounded by my family, feeling like the walls were closing in. David paced the floor, looking anxious. Ara sat in the corner, dabbing at her eyes with tissues, the picture of a worried daughter. But I wasn't fooled anymore. "How could something like that get into the food?" Ara kept saying, shaking her head. "It doesn't make sense." If I hadn't seen her eyes earlier, if I hadn't seen Marty's terror, maybe I'd have believed her. Marty hadn't spoken since we arrived. He sat beside me, small and pale, occasionally glancing toward his mother with eyes that carried far too much knowledge for a boy his age. After 3 long hours, the doctors finally said Margaret was stable. David sighed and said we should all go home to rest. "There's nothing more we can do tonight," he said, and I noticed how quickly Ara agreed. "You're right," she said, standing at once. "Marty needs his sleep for school." But as we walked through the parking lot, Marty tugged on my sleeve. "Grandma," he whispered, "can I stay with you tonight, please?" I saw the flicker of anger in Ara's eyes before she forced a smile. "Sweetheart, you have school tomorrow," she said softly. "You need to sleep in your own bed." "I want to stay with Grandma," Marty insisted, louder this time. David tried to intervene, but I stopped him. "Let him stay," I said firmly. "After everything tonight, I could use the company." The look Ara gave me could have frozen water, but she couldn't refuse without revealing too much. She nodded tightly. "Of course." Back at my house, the same house where hours earlier someone had tried to harm me, Marty finally broke. He collapsed onto the couch, sobbing until he could barely breathe. I held him, rocking gently until his crying slowed. Then he whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have stopped her." "Stopped who, honey?" I asked softly. He looked up at me, eyes wide and haunted. "Mom, she's been planning this for months." The words hit like a storm. Deep down, I'd feared it, but hearing it from my grandson shattered me. "Tell me everything," I said quietly. And he did. Marty told me about phone calls he'd overheard, Ara talking to someone about getting rid of the old lady and making it look natural. He'd seen her researching dangerous substances online, testing how they dissolved in food. She'd even practiced, using sugar and water to see if anyone could notice. "She told me if I ever said anything, she'd send me away," he whispered. "She said no one would believe me because I'm just a kid." "When I saw her put that stuff in your plate tonight, I couldn't let you eat it." I felt my stomach twist. "How long has this been going on?" "Since summer," he said quietly. "Maybe longer." She started asking me weird questions about you, like what medicine you take, if you ever felt sick after eating, if you had chest pains. My hands trembled. My own daughter-in-law had been using my grandson to gather information about my health, planning to make whatever happened look like a tragic accident. I took a deep breath. "Marty, is your father involved?" Marty's face crumpled. "I don't know. Maybe," he said softly. "Dad's been acting strange. He keeps asking Mom questions about your will." My will. Of course. I owned my house outright, had a modest nest egg, and a few investments that had grown nicely over the years. Not a fortune by any means, but apparently enough to make someone desperate. "There's something else, Grandma," Marty whispered, barely audible. "I think Mom's tried before." My breath caught. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "Remember when you got really sick after that dinner party last month? And that other time you ended up in the hospital?" I remembered. Both times I'd blamed it on bad food or a stomach bug. Both times Ara had been the one urging me to eat certain dishes. "She's been practicing," I whispered, the realization turning my blood cold. "Testing." Marty nodded miserably. "Tonight was supposed to be the real one. I heard her on the phone yesterday. She said it would finally be over." The words hit like a hammer. Ara hadn't just made a rash decision. This had been planned, methodical, careful, and cruel. She'd been experimenting, trying to find just the right amount to make it look natural, and she'd dragged my grandson into her web, forcing him to live with that knowledge. "Marty, why didn't Margaret get as sick as I would have?" I asked. "Because you're smaller," he said simply. "And Mom probably put extra in your plate to make sure." The precision of it made my skin crawl. She had measured how to end me, but one question still burned. "Honey, how did you know for sure it would happen tonight?" Marty hesitated, then blushed with shame. I overheard them talking last night. Mom said the old lady would finally be gone by Wednesday. Then she said they could start looking at retirement homes." "For me?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He shook his head quickly. "No, Grandma. For me. She said once you were gone and they had everything, they wouldn't need me anymore, that I was too much work, that I knew too much." The room seemed to tilt around me. It wasn't enough that she wanted me out of the way, she was planning to get rid of her own son afterward. Marty wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "That's when I knew I had to stop her. You're the only one who really loves me, Grandma." I pulled him close, heartbreaking for this brave little soul who had carried such a heavy secret. But beneath my grief, something colder took root. Ara thought she was clever. She thought she'd built the perfect plan, that she could destroy us both and walk away clean. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd survived 68 years, raised 4 kids, buried a husband, and built a life through grit and strategy. If she wanted a game, I was ready to play only this time by my rules. But first, I needed proof. Real proof. Enough to protect Marty forever. "Marty," I said softly, brushing his hair back, "how would you like to help Grandma with a little project?" He looked up, a flicker of hope lighting his tired eyes. "What kind of project?" I smiled, a calm, deliberate smile. "The kind that's going to save both our lives." The next morning, I woke with a clarity sharper than I'd felt in years. Marty was still asleep on the couch, curled under the old quilt I'd sewn when David was his age. Looking at him, so small and fragile, strengthened my resolve. That boy had risked everything to protect me. Now it was my turn to protect him. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table where I'd planned birthdays and holidays for decades. But today, I was planning something entirely different. When the phone rang at 8:30, I was ready. "Mom, how are you holding up?" David's voice sounded caring, but underneath I caught something else. Impatience. "Oh, you know me?" I said, letting my voice tremble a little. "I'm still so shaken up about poor Margaret. I keep thinking, it could have been any of us." "Yeah, it's scary," he agreed quickly. "Listen, Ara thinks maybe you shouldn't be cooking for a while, just until we figure out what happened. Maybe we can bring you meals, or you could eat out more." I almost laughed. Ara suddenly worried about my cooking. The irony was thick enough to choke on. "That's very sweet of her," I said lightly. "But I'll be fine. I'm planning to have the kitchen deep cleaned just to be safe." There was a pause. "Mom," David continued carefully, "Ara also thinks maybe it's time to talk about your living situation. The house is so big for just you." And there it was. Less than 12 hours after their plan had failed, they were already on to phase 2. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice calm. "Just that maybe it's time to consider a place with meal service, where you don't have to worry about cooking or keeping up this big house." I smiled to myself as I stared at the phone. They had no idea. "I see," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm. Well, that's certainly something to think about. Is Marty still sleeping? Yeah, David replied. Ara says to let him rest. He can miss school today after all the stress from last night. How convenient, I thought. Keep Marty home, keep him isolated. Probably try to convince him that what he saw wasn't what he thought he saw. Actually, David, I said lightly, I was hoping Marty could stay with me for a few more days. I could really use the company, and I think he needs a little time to process everything. There was a long pause. I don't think that's a good idea, Mom. Marty needs routine. And Ara thinks— What Ara thinks, I interrupted, letting a hint of steel into my tone, isn't really relevant here. Marty is my grandson, and after what happened, I think a few quiet days with his grandmother will do him good. Another silence. I could almost hear him thinking, wondering how much I knew. Of course not, he finally said. It's just that Ara worries about you being alone with a child at your age. At my age? I said dryly. David, I raised 4 children, including you, and none of them ended up in therapy. I think I can handle one 12-year-old for a few days. When I hung up, I found Marty awake in the living room, looking lost and frightened. Hey, sweetheart, I said softly, sitting beside him. How are you feeling? Scared, he admitted. What if Mom finds out I told you? What if she tries to hurt you again? I took his small hands in mine. Listen to me, Marty. She's not going to hurt me again because we're not going to let her. But I'll need your help, and it might feel scary sometimes. Can you be brave for me? He straightened his shoulders, trying to look strong. What do you need me to do? Over the next hour, I laid out my plan. It was risky, but it was the only way to protect us both and gather proof. First, I said, we document everything. Every conversation, every strange comment, every memory you can recall from the past few months. I pulled out a notebook, and we spent the morning writing. Dates, times, little details. Marty remembered more than I expected. He recalled overheard phone calls, moments when Ara acted oddly, and the nights I'd fallen ill after eating at their house. Second, I continued, we make them believe their plan is working. He frowned. How? I'm going to start acting sick, forgetful, confused. They'll think whatever they gave me is having delayed effects, and that's when they'll slip up. Marty's eyes widened. But what if they try again? They won't, I said confidently, though inside I wasn't so sure. Not for a while. They'll want to see if last night did enough first, and don't worry, I'm not touching anything they bring me again. That afternoon, when David and Ara arrived to pick up Marty, I was ready for my little performance. Oh, I'm so glad you're here, I said, letting my voice waver. I've been feeling so strange today, dizzy, forgetful. I even misplaced my phone twice. I watched Ara carefully. Her eyes flickered with a spark she tried to hide behind her polite concern. Oh, Inns, maybe you should see a doctor, she said, her tone dripping with rehearsed sympathy. Maybe, I replied, sighing. Although at my age, these things just happen, don't they? My memory isn't what it used to be. Mom, are you sure you're okay? David asked. For a brief second, I heard genuine worry, the voice of the little boy I used to tuck into bed. I'm fine, sweetheart, I said gently. Just rattled, that's all. When they moved to take Marty home, I played my final card. Actually, I said, holding Marty's hand, I'd feel safer if he stayed one more night. I've been feeling lightheaded and I'm afraid I might fall. It was perfect. They couldn't refuse without looking heartless, and if they thought my mind was slipping, all the better. Of course, Era said quickly, her tone sweet but her eyes cold. Marty should definitely stay and look after you. After they left, Marty turned to me in awe. Grandma, you're really good at this. I smiled. When you've lived as long as I have, sweetheart, you learn how to read people. Your mother thinks she's clever, but she's also very predictable. That evening, Ara called. Her voice was syrupy with false concern. How are you feeling, Inns? Oh, not very well, I said, adding a tremor to my tone. I had another dizzy spell this afternoon. Poor Marty had to help me to the bathroom. That's terrible, she said, but I could hear the excitement she was trying to hide. Maybe you should go to the emergency room. No, I said quickly. You know I hate hospitals. I'll be fine. These old bones just need rest. Of course, she said smoothly. Well, try to get some sleep, and maybe think about what David mentioned this morning. That house is so big for you, especially if you're having these spells. You might be right, I sighed. This place does feel awfully large for someone in my condition. When I hung up, I turned to Marty, who had been standing quietly in the doorway. Did you hear that? I asked. He nodded slowly. She sounded happy that you're sick. Exactly, I said with a thin smile. Which means she's going to get careless. People always do when they think they've already won. Over the next 2 days, I perfected my act. I forgot conversations, mixed up names, stumbled once or twice on purpose, and complained of dizziness and nausea. Little did Ara know, every word, every visit, and every phone call from now on was being recorded. Each time Ara called, I made sure to sound a little weaker, a little more forgetful, and each time I could hear the satisfaction in her voice growing. On the 3rd day, she finally slipped. Inns, she said during her morning check-in, I've been doing some reading about your symptoms. I think you might have had a small stroke. Sometimes they're so mild you don't even realize it. A stroke, of course. The perfect cover story. That would explain the confusion, the dizziness, and if I'd supposedly had one small episode, no one would question it if I suddenly had a major one later. Do you really think so? I asked, letting my voice tremble with fear. I do, she said, sounding almost caring. I think you should see a doctor right away. In fact, David and I have been talking, and we think you should come stay with us for a while, just until you're feeling better. Stay with them, where they could control what I ate, who I spoke to, and when my condition would take a final turn. That's very thoughtful of you, I said carefully. But I don't want to be a burden. You could never be a burden, she lied smoothly. We want to take care of you. That's what family does. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the phone. They were accelerating their plan. I'd bought time by making them think their first attempt was working, but now they were eager to finish what they started. The problem was, I still didn't have enough proof. Marty's word alone wouldn't hold in court. I had my suspicions, but nothing that could stand against a polished couple with money, lawyers, and charm. I needed to catch them in the act, which meant one thing. I had to let them try again. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, a strange calm settled over me. They'd made their first big mistake. They'd underestimated the wrong grandmother. I wasn't just some fragile woman waiting for fate. I was a mother and a protector. And there's nothing more dangerous than a grandmother defending her child. Ara wanted to play games with life and control. Fine. But this time, I would be the one writing the rules. I had 48 hours before David and Ara expected me to move into their home. 48 hours to build a trap that would expose them and protect Marty forever. The first thing I did was call my lawyer, Robert Chen. I'd known Robert for 15 years. He'd managed my late husband's estate and was one of the few people I trusted completely. Robert, I need to change my will immediately, I said when he answered. Inns, are you okay? You sound tense. I'll explain when I see you. Can you fit me in today? An hour later, I was sitting in his office with Marty beside me. Robert raised an eyebrow, but waited until we were settled. What's this about, Inns? I told him everything. The strange illnesses, the dinner, the hospital, Marty's confession. I left nothing out. Robert listened silently, his expression tightening as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned forward. This is serious. Have you called the police? With what evidence? I asked. A 12-year-old's word and a hunch? They'd think I was losing my mind. He nodded slowly. What do you want to do? I want to change my will. Everything goes to Marty with you as trustee until he's 25. David gets nothing, and I want you to keep the original locked away. Don't tell anyone. Robert's brows furrowed. If you think they're after your estate, taking away their motive might be smart. No, I said firmly. If I change it and they find out, they'll just come up with another reason. They've gone too far already. The only way to stop them is to catch them trying. Robert's face went pale. You want them to try again? I want them to try, I said quietly, and I want them to fail on record. Once and for all. He exhaled slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to know the truth if something happens to me. And I need insurance backup. If they make another move, you call the investigators. I also want guardianship papers ready. If anything happens to David or Ara, Marty stays with me. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Robert would have private investigators ready to step in at a moment's notice. He'd also draft a sealed letter for Marty in case anything went wrong, a letter explaining that none of this was his fault. When we finally stood to leave, Robert looked at me seriously. Inns, are you sure about this? There has to be another way. There isn't, I said, my voice steady. They've already decided I'm not supposed to be here. The only question left is whether I'll be ready when they come. That evening, I began phase 2. I called my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson Dorothy. She lived across the street, 72 years old, sharp as a blade, and the unofficial neighborhood watchdog. Dorothy, I need a big favor, I said quietly. What kind of favor? She asked, instantly alert. I took a deep breath and told her everything. When I finished, Dorothy didn't hesitate. That little blonde snake? She snapped. I knew there was something off about her. Tell me what you need, honey, I'm in. Dorothy huffed on the phone. She's always been too sweet, you know. And the way she looks at your house, it's like she's already measuring it for new curtains. Dorothy, I said quietly, I need you to watch my house tomorrow when they come to pick me up. If anything seems off, anything at all, call the police immediately. What do you mean, off? If they take me out on a stretcher? If I look drugged or confused? If Marty looks frightened or tries to get your attention, don't wait. Just call. There was silence for a moment, then Dorothy's voice hardened. Inns, are you sure you want to go through with this? I don't have a choice. They won't stop until they succeed, and if I'm gone, Marty will be trapped with them. I can't let that happen. The next morning, I turned my home into a stage set. A tiny digital recorder went inside my purse. Another was hidden behind the flour canister in the kitchen. Marty and I worked out a code. He'd text Dorothy at set times. If he missed even one, she'd know something was wrong. When David and Ara arrived to help me pack, everything was in place. Mom, you look terrible, David said, and for once he sounded genuinely worried. I did look terrible. I'd spent 20 minutes making myself appear weaker pale foundation, trembling hands, even a shawl draped loosely over my shoulders. I've been having dizzy spells all morning, I said faintly, and I can't seem to remember what I need to bring. Don't worry about a thing, Ara said quickly. We'll take care of it. You just sit and rest. I watched her move through my house, touching my belongings like she already owned them. Her eyes lingered on my framed wedding photo, my china cabinet, the antique clock David's father had restored for me. Then she reappeared, smiling that perfect polished smile. Inns, I made you some tea. It'll help settle your stomach. She handed me a steaming cup, brewed in my kitchen. The scent was familiar, but faintly metallic. And in that moment, I knew. That's very thoughtful, I said softly, taking it with shaking hands. My heart hammered, but my voice stayed steady. This was it, the moment of truth. I raised the cup, letting the liquid touch my lips but didn't swallow. I faked a sip, spilling most of it back into the cup when she wasn't looking. This tastes different, I said, frowning slightly. Different how? She asked, her voice tight. Bitter, almost metallic. Ara's shoulders stiffened. That's probably just because you're not feeling well, she said quickly. Everything tastes strange when you're sick. I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. Then I set the cup down. I think I need to lie down, I murmured, standing shakily and letting myself sway for effect. Mom, are you okay? David asked, rushing to steady me. Just dizzy, I whispered, sinking onto the couch. What happened next played out exactly as I'd scripted it in my mind. I slumped sideways, breathing shallowly, my eyes fluttering. Marty. My brave little actor started to cry, calling my name. David's panic was immediate. "Call 911, now!" But Ara stayed unnervingly calm. "Don't call yet," she said firmly. "Let's see if she wakes up. Sometimes these spells pass on their own." "Are you crazy?" David snapped. "She's barely breathing." "Calm down," Ara said coolly. "Panicking won't help." Through my half-closed eyes, I saw her glance at her watch. She was timing it, waiting, measuring how long it would take for the poison she believed I'd swallowed to work. "Please, Mom, call 911. Marty begged, his voice trembling with perfect fear. "In a minute, sweetheart," she said sweetly. "Let's just wait a little longer." And that was the proof I needed. Any normal person would have called for help instantly. Any innocent person would have been terrified. Her composure, her control was exactly what would expose her. After what felt like forever but was only a few minutes, David finally shouted, "That's it, I'm calling 911. "No, wait," Ara snapped. I think she's already gone." Gone. That's what she wanted. I waited until I heard the faint sound of sirens before letting my eyes flutter open. What happened?" I whispered weakly. David's relief was genuine. Ara's disappointment wasn't. "You fainted, Mom," David said, gripping my hand. "The paramedics are here." As the EMTs entered, checking my pulse and blood pressure, I gave them the performance of my life, confused, weak, unsure of what had happened. "I remember something bitter in the tea," I murmured, glancing toward the cup on the side table. One of the paramedics immediately took note. "We'll take you in for observation," he said. "At your age, a collapse like this could mean something serious." "Is that really necessary?" Ara asked quickly. "She seems fine now." The paramedic gave her a look that spoke volumes. "Ma'am, she was unconscious for several minutes. We're not taking chances." As they lifted the stretcher, I clutched my purse, the one holding the recorder that had captured every word. Then I looked toward Marty. Our eyes met for a brief second. I gave him a small nod. He understood everything. At the hospital, I kept up my act while the doctors ran every test imaginable. Of course, everything came back perfectly normal, because I hadn't actually swallowed a drop of what Ara had prepared for me, but the results didn't matter. What mattered was the paper trail. When the nurse asked what I'd eaten or drunk before the episode, I made sure to mention the tea Ara had given me. "It tasted strange," I said weakly. "Bitter, almost metallic. I've never tasted anything like it." The nurse made a note, and with that, there was now a record, a documented warning in my medical file. If anything ever happened to me again, this conversation would come back to light. That evening, David and Ara came by with Marty in tow. "How are you feeling, Mom?" David asked gently. "Confused," I said honestly. "The doctors can't figure out what caused the collapse." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Ara said smoothly, but her eyes betrayed her. There was frustration there. Her carefully crafted plan had failed again. And now there were official records describing my symptoms. "The doctor did ask about the tea," I said casually, watching her reaction. "He seemed very interested in the metallic taste I mentioned. Said they might want to test it." Ara froze. Her smile faltered. "The tea?" she stammered. "It was just regular tea, Earl Grey." "I think that's what I told him," I said lightly. But he still seemed curious. "Test it?" David repeated, confused. "Test tea? When someone collapses unexpectedly, they have to consider all possibilities," I said, including something they might have consumed. The silence that followed was deafening. Ara's hands trembled as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Well," she said finally, her voice higher than usual, "I threw the cup away. I was cleaning up while we waited for the ambulance." Of course she had. What she didn't know was that I'd only pretended to drink it. The real cup, still holding most of its contents, was safely sitting inside my dishwasher at home, waiting. And Dorothy Patterson, ever watchful from across the street, had seen Ara throw something into my garbage bin while she thought no one was looking. As visiting hours ended and my family prepared to leave, I reached for Marty's hand. "I'll be home soon, sweetheart," I whispered. "Promise?" he asked softly. "I promise," I said, smiling faintly. "And when I come home, everything's going to be different." Ara overheard and smiled her perfect, sugar-coated smile. "Of course it will be," she said sweetly. "We're going to take such good care of you, Inns. You'll never have to worry about anything again." Her tone was tender, but her eyes told another story. Cold, determined. She wasn't done, not even close. But that was exactly what I needed. Because tomorrow, when I returned home, I would give her one final chance to expose herself. And this time, the whole world would see. The hospital released me the next afternoon with a prescription for mild anxiety medication I had no intention of taking. As David wheeled me toward the car, I played my part perfectly. Fragile, shaky, dependent. "I still feel strange," I murmured as Ara helped me into the passenger seat, "like I'm not quite myself." "That's completely normal after what you've been through," she said sweetly. "You just need rest and people to take care of you." The drive to their house felt like a slow, silent funeral procession. I stared out the window at the familiar streets, wondering if this would be the last time I saw them. But each time doubt crept in, I looked at Marty's reflection in the window, my quiet little warrior, and my resolve returned. Their house was beautiful in that cold, magazine-perfect way. 2 stories, all clean lines and polished stone. Everything looked expensive and lifeless. David carried my suitcase upstairs while Ara showed me to what she called my room. "We set you up on the first floor," she said, opening the door. "No stairs, easy access to the bathroom. We want you comfortable." The room felt like a cell, a small window, a single lamp, and furniture arranged so the bed couldn't be seen from the hallway. Most importantly, it was far from Marty's room upstairs. "This is lovely," I said softly, taking a seat by the window. "So thoughtful of you." "I just want you to feel completely safe," Ara said. "That's the most important thing." Safe. The irony almost made me laugh. That evening, they treated me like delicate glass. David hovered, asking if I needed anything. Marty stayed close, pretending to be the concerned grandson while secretly checking my signals. And Ara watched, always watching. Dinner was a performance. Ara brought out light dishes, soup, crackers, and a steaming cup of herbal tea. "You should eat more," she urged, ladling another spoonful of soup into my bowl. "You need your strength." "I know, dear," I said, stirring slowly. "But everything tastes so strange lately, ever since that episode." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My continued survival clearly irritated her. She smiled, but her voice carried a sharp edge. "Well, you'll feel better soon, I'm sure." "Oh, I'm sure I will," I replied calmly. "Sooner than you think." After dinner, as David helped me back to my room, I heard Ara on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was low, controlled. "No, she's not getting better," she said. "If anything, she's worse, more confused, weaker. I don't think it'll be much longer." She said it so casually, as if discussing a business deal, not a person's life. My life. That night, lying in the unfamiliar guest bed, I could hear their voices drifting through the vents. The house was quiet, but the heating ducts carried every word from the room directly above mine, their bedroom. "How long is this going to take?" David sounded tired, nervous. "Not much longer," Ara replied coolly. "She's already showing signs of decline. The confusion, the weakness, it's all happening just as expected." "I can't keep doing this," David said. "Every time I look at her, I feel sick." "You feel sick?" Ara snapped. Her voice hardened. "We've come too far to stop now." "Do you really want to spend the rest of your life scraping by while she sits on money she doesn't even use?" "No, but no buts," she interrupted. "A few more days, maybe a week, and we'll finally be free. Real lives, real money." There was a pause. And then David's voice softened. "What about Marty?" Era's tone changed, colder, detached. "Marty will adjust. Kids are resilient. Once everything's settled, we'll look into boarding schools, good ones. He'll get a proper education and learn not to ask so many questions." Boarding school. They were planning to send my grandson away as soon as I was gone, after they had everything. The next morning, Ara brought me breakfast in bed. Another thoughtful gesture, another opportunity to control what I ate. "I made your favorite," she said brightly, setting a tray on my lap. "Scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice with a little honey. You need the energy." The juice looked innocent enough, but I wasn't taking any chances. I waited until she left the room, then quietly poured most of it into the potted plant by the window and refilled the glass with water from the bathroom sink. Around noon, while I was resting, I heard her voice again on the phone, sharper now. I moved closer to the vent. "It has to be today," she said. "David's getting nervous, and the old woman's asking too many questions about her medications. I think she suspects something." A pause. "No, I can't wait any longer. This afternoon, with her tea, I'll make it strong enough that there won't be any questions this time." My blood ran cold. This was it. Her final move. I spent the next few hours getting ready. I texted Dorothy from my hidden phone. "Today's the day." She replied instantly, "I'm watching." I checked the recorder inside my purse. It was running and made sure it was placed where it would capture everything. Then I prepared Marty. When he came home from school, he slipped quietly into my room. "Today's the day," I whispered. "Remember what we talked about. No matter what happens, no matter how bad it looks, don't try to stop her. Let it happen." His face went pale, but he nodded bravely. "I understand." At 4:00, right on schedule, Ara appeared with a tray. "I thought you might like some chamomile," she said sweetly. "It's calming." She'd even added a plate of cookies beside it, the perfect image of a caring daughter-in-law tending to her elderly relative. "That's so kind of you," I said, taking the cup with trembling hands. I smelled it instantly. Beneath the floral scent of chamomile, there was something sharp and chemical, sour enough to sting my nose. Whatever she'd mixed into that cup, it was meant to work fast. "Drink up," she said, sitting across from me. "It's good for you." This was the moment I'd been preparing for. I lifted the cup, made sure she saw me take what looked like a large sip, then set it down with a contented sigh. "Delicious," I said softly. "You always make the best tea." Ara smiled faintly, but her eyes never left my face. She was studying me, waiting, counting seconds. We sat there in silence for several minutes. I asked polite questions about her day, complimented the cookies, played the role of the gentle, clueless grandmother perfectly, all while the cup sat cooling on the table, untouched except for the surface sip I'd faked. Then Ara leaned forward slightly. "Inz, there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about," she began, voice gentle. "Of course, dear. What is it?" "It's about your will." There it was. She couldn't even wait for me to fade naturally. She needed to be sure of her reward first. "My will?" I asked, widening my eyes in confusion. "Yes," she said softly. "David and I were just thinking you might want to update it, you know. Make sure everything's clear and legal. We wouldn't want any issues for Marty later." "What kind of issues?" I asked carefully. "Well," she said, her tone perfectly rehearsed, "if something ever happens to you, which of course we hope won't be for many years, but if it does, we want to be sure Marty has guardians who love him and that your finances are handled properly." She was so smooth, so perfectly rehearsed, that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have actually been touched by her concern. "I suppose that makes sense," I said slowly. "What did you have in mind?" "Nothing major," she replied quickly. "Just updating the beneficiaries to reflect the current family situation, making sure David and I are listed as Marty's guardians and that the inheritance is structured properly." "Structured how?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Oh, you know how these things go. Trusts, legal oversight. David and I could manage everything for Marty until he's older." "Much older," I thought. Like never. I should probably talk to my lawyer about this, I said carefully. That's not necessary, Era said at once. David knows someone, a lawyer who specializes in estate planning, much more up to date than that old man you've been using. Of course she did. Someone who'd make sure the papers were written exactly the way she wanted them. I don't know, I said hesitantly. Robert's been handling my affairs for years. I trust him. Ara's tone changed, her voice sharpening ever so slightly. I think you're not understanding how serious this situation is. You've been having episodes, memory lapses, confusion. What if something happens to you and your affairs aren't in order? What if Marty ends up in foster care because of a legal mess? She was threatening me, using my grandson as leverage. I wouldn't want that, I said weakly. Of course you wouldn't, she said softly, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. That's why we need to take care of this right away. Today, if possible. Today. She wanted me to sign a new will and then pass away tonight from that cup of tea. Quick, efficient, and legally clean. I'm feeling tired, I said, pressing a hand to my forehead. Can we talk about this tomorrow? Era stood abruptly, her patience slipping for the first time. There might not be a tomorrow, she said sharply. The words hung between us, cold, final, unmistakable. What do you mean? I whispered. Her eyes widened. She quickly forced a gentle smile back onto her face. I just mean, at your age, with your health issues, it's risky to put off important matters. But it was too late. I'd heard the truth. The mask had cracked. Ara, I said softly, is there something you're not telling me? She sat back down, her tone shifting into false compassion. The doctors at the hospital told David and me that your condition may worsen. They think you've had several small strokes, and that a bigger one could happen at any time. I stared at her. They told you that? Why didn't they tell me? They thought it might be too upsetting for you, she said smoothly. But David and I felt you had a right to know, so you can make the best decisions for your future. It was a masterful lie. She was creating a fake medical crisis to push me into signing over everything, using imaginary memory loss as her cover story, so later no one would believe I even remembered the conversation. How long do I have? I whispered. They can't say for sure, she said, lowering her voice to a sympathetic hush. But they think you should put your affairs in order as soon as possible. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of her deception wash over me. She wasn't content just to end my life quietly. She wanted to make me believe it was happening naturally, to make me cooperate in my own destruction. I need to think about this, I said at last. Of course, she replied, rising from her chair. But don't think too long, for Marty's sake. After she left, I sat staring at the teacup on the table. In its reflection, I saw everything I'd lost. My son's love, my family's trust, my sense of safety. But I also saw something else, strength. The same strength that had carried me through 68 years of life, through loss, through heartbreak, through rebuilding. Ara thought she'd broken me, that she'd turned me into a confused, frightened woman who'd sign whatever papers she put in front of me. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. Tomorrow morning, I would give her exactly what she wanted, a confrontation, only this time she'd be the one trapped, and I'd make sure there were witnesses. I woke up to the sound of Ara moving around the kitchen, probably wondering why I wasn't gone yet. The poisoned tea still sat untouched on my nightstand, a quiet reminder of her failure. Today was the day I stopped surviving and started fighting back. At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Ara answered, and I heard the surprise in her voice. "Mr. Chen, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to see my client," Robert said firmly. His voice carried easily down the hallway. "Mrs. Holloway called me yesterday and asked me to stop by this morning." Of course, I hadn't called him. This was the signal we'd planned in advance. "She's not feeling well," Ara said quickly, tension slipping into her voice. "Perhaps you could come back another time." "I'm afraid this can't wait," Robert replied. "It's regarding her will." The magic words. Footsteps hurried toward my room, and Ara appeared in the doorway, her face flushed. "Inns, your lawyer's here," she said. "He says you called him about your will." "Did I?" I blinked, feigning confusion. "I don't remember calling anyone." "It's all right," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "You've been having some memory issues lately." "But since he's here," Ara said smoothly, "maybe we should take care of that business we discussed yesterday." Perfect. She was so eager to secure my estate that she walked right into my trap. "I suppose that would be all right," I said weakly. "Could you help me to the living room?" We moved slowly down the hallway, my hand trembling lightly on her arm, the picture of frailty. But inside, I felt sharp, alive. When we reached the living room, I saw Robert waiting, and he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a woman in plain clothes, composed and confident. "Who's this?" Ara asked sharply. "Detective Sarah Martinez," Robert said smoothly. "She specializes in elder fraud investigations. Given Mrs. Holloway's recent health concerns and the sensitivity of estate matters, I thought it best to have a witness." Ara's face went pale, but she forced a tight smile. "Of course," she said through clenched teeth. "We want everything to be completely legal." I settled into the chair by the window. Detective Martinez offered a kind smile. "Mrs. Holloway, I understand you've had some health issues recently." "Yes," I said, glancing nervously at Ara. "Episodes of confusion, dizziness. My daughter-in-law thinks I may have had small strokes." "I'm sorry to hear that," the detective said gently. "Have you seen a specialist about these symptoms?" "The hospital ran some tests," I replied, "but Ara says the doctors told her things they didn't tell me." Detective Martinez turned toward Ara. "Is that right, Mrs. Holloway? You were given medical information the patient herself didn't receive?" Ara shifted in her seat. "They didn't want to upset her," she said quickly, "given her fragile state." "I see," the detective replied, her tone calm but firm. "And you felt it was appropriate to share information the doctors chose not to disclose?" The question sliced through the air. Ara blinked rapidly. I thought she had a right to know." "Of course," Detective Martinez said smoothly. "Now, Mr. Chen tells me there's some urgency about updating the will." "Yes," Ara said, regaining some composure. "We just want to make sure everything is in order, especially with her health being so uncertain." "That's very thoughtful," the detective replied. "And what changes were you hoping to make?" Ara launched into her carefully rehearsed speech: guardianship for Marty, trust management, responsible adults, overseeing finances. She sounded so professional, so polished, that anyone might have believed her. But Detective Martinez was taking notes, and the small recorder sitting openly on the coffee table was catching every word. "So," the detective said when Ara finished, "you believe Mrs. Holloway is unable to manage her own affairs?" "Not unable," Ara said quickly, realizing the trap too late. "Just confused sometimes, forgetful, but competent enough to make changes to her will, with guidance." "Whose guidance?" the detective asked evenly. "Mine, ours," Ara stammered. "David and I just want what's best for the family." "Of course you do," the detective said, her tone deceptively kind. "Mrs. Holloway, do you recall asking your daughter-in-law to make you tea yesterday?" My heart began to pound, but I kept my expression calm. "Tea?" I said softly. "Yes, chamomile, I think. It tasted strange, bitter. I didn't finish it." Detective Martinez nodded, turning back to Ara. "I understand you disposed of the cup afterward?" "I was just cleaning up," Ara said, her voice tight. "Fortunately," the detective continued, "your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, noticed you placing something in the trash. She was concerned and decided to keep the item safe." The color drained completely from Ara's face. "Item," she whispered. "The teacup," Detective Martinez said evenly. "Its contents have been tested. They contained traces of a dangerous chemical. It's a controlled substance, not something one finds in household items." The room went silent. Ara stared at the detective, her carefully built world collapsing one truth at a time. That's impossible, she stammered. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Detective Martinez replied, standing. We also analyzed the dishwater from Mrs. Holloway's home after the earlier incident. The same substance, different concentration. It appears you've been attempting to harm your mother-in-law for several months. Ara jumped to her feet. This is ridiculous. I would never. We also have testimony from a witness, the detective interrupted calmly. Someone who overheard your plans. Ara froze. Then her eyes snapped toward me, furious, wild. You, she hissed. You knew. You've been toying with me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I dropped the frail old lady act completely. I sat up straight, looked her directly in the eye, and smiled. Yes, I said clearly. I knew. Since the night you tried to poison me the first time, the night my grandson saved my life. Marty, she breathed, realization dawning. That brave little boy, I corrected. He's been living in fear for months, afraid you'd hurt me, or abandon him. He's 12 years old, Ara. 12. And you made him live with your lies. I gave him everything, she shouted, her composure finally breaking. A home, clothes, food. You gave him nightmares, I said coldly. You forced him to choose between saving me and staying loyal to his mother. You turned your own child into a spy, just to make your crime look natural. Detective Martinez stepped forward. Mrs. Ara Holloway, she said formally, you are being taken into custody for attempted harm and conspiracy. Ara's hands shook as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. She turned toward me one last time, her beautiful face twisting with hatred. You think you've won? She spat. David will never forgive you. I met her glare calmly. Maybe not. But one day, when he sees the truth for himself, he'll thank me for saving our grandson. Ara's eyes burned with fury. Marty will never forgive you for what you've done to his mother, she spat. You'll die alone, you bitter old woman. I met her gaze calmly. Ara, I said, steady and quiet, I've been alone for 3 years, ever since you married my son and turned him against me. The difference is, now I'm alone by choice, not because someone is trying to end my life. As they led her away, David came rushing down the stairs. He must have been upstairs the entire time, hiding from what he already knew was coming. Mom, what's happening? He asked, though the guilt on his face told me he already knew the answer. Your wife has been arrested for trying to harm me, I said simply. That's impossible, he whispered, but his voice wavered, thin, uncertain. Mr. Holloway, Detective Martinez said evenly, we'll need to speak with you as well. We have evidence suggesting you were aware of your wife's actions. I watched my son's face crumble as the truth closed in. He had made his choice the moment he decided my money was worth more than my life. Mom, he whispered, I never wanted this. Yes, you did, I said softly. Maybe not at first, but somewhere along the way you decided it was easier to stand beside her than to protect me. You let her turn you into someone I don't recognize. I'm still your son. I shook my head. My son would have called for help the moment he realized something was wrong. My son would have protected me. You're not that person anymore, David. You're just a stranger who shares my name. The next few hours passed in a blur. Statements, evidence bags, flashing lights outside. Through it all, one thing never changed. Marty never left my side. His small hand stayed wrapped around mine, finally free to love his grandmother without fear. When the police were gone, when the reporters stopped hovering at the edge of the lawn, it was just the two of us sitting quietly in my living room. Grandma, he whispered, are you really okay? I'm better than okay, sweetheart, I said, pulling him close. I'm free. What's going to happen to me now? You're going to live here with me, I said, brushing his hair back. I've already talked to the lawyers. You'll go to school, play with your friends, and never have to worry about adults who hurt people ever again. He hesitated. What about Mom and Dad? I paused, choosing my words carefully. Your parents made some very bad choices, Marty. They have to face the consequences. But that's not your fault. and it's not your job to fix it." He looked up at me with watery eyes. "Do you think they ever really loved me?" My heart cracked, but I answered honestly, "I think they loved the idea of you. But real love doesn't send you away when things get hard. Real love doesn't make a child keep dangerous secrets." He frowned. "How do you know the difference?" I smiled and kissed the top of his head. "Real love protects you, even when it's difficult. Even when it means standing up to the people who should love you but don't." 6 months later, I sat in that same living room, watching Marty do his homework at the very coffee table where Detective Martinez had placed her recorder. The house felt lighter now, filled with real laughter instead of forced politeness. Ara had been sentenced to 15 years. David received 5 for conspiracy. With good behavior, he'd likely serve less. Both had written letters to Marty, but I kept them sealed until he's old enough to decide for himself what to do with them. The inheritance they were so desperate for? I restructured it completely. The house will go to Marty when he turns 25, along with enough savings to ensure he'll never depend on anyone's greed again. The rest I donated to charities supporting children in foster care, kids who, like Marty, were let down by the very adults meant to protect them. But the real victory wasn't money, it was peace. It was Marty's laughter echoing through the hallways. It was the way he ran to hug me after school. It was the way he slept soundly at night, unafraid. I'm 78 years old now, and for the first time in years, I feel alive. I learned that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who would fight for you when everyone else turns away. I learned that I'm stronger than I ever believed. Strong enough to outthink people who mistook my age for weakness. Strong enough to risk everything for my grandson's future. Strong enough to rebuild from the ruins. As I watched Marty working on his math homework, his tongue poking out in concentration the same way his father's used to when he was a boy, I felt something I hadn't in decades. Peace. Complete, quiet peace. The people who should have loved me had tried to destroy me, but in the end, all they did was remind me of my own strength. And sometimes that realization, that fire that refuses to go out, is the greatest gift of all. Now I'm curious about you, the listener. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. And before you go, I've left 2 more powerful stories waiting for you on the final screen, both true channel favorites that will absolutely surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.